welcome to this deep dive. Today we're tackling, a question that's echoed through history, really. What makes a life worth living?
It's a big one.
Definitely. We've gathered a whole range of perspectives, from ancient philosophers and religious traditions right up to modern thinkers.
Yeah, and our goal here is to sort of distill the core ideas, the insights that might help you, our listener, navigate this profound question in your own life.
It's striking, too, when you look across all these different sources, different times, different cultures. There's this common thread, isn't there? This shared yearning.
Absolutely. Maria Shriver has this really compelling image she calls the open field.
Ah, the open field.
Yeah, picture this space, like totally free from judgment, free from expectations. And in that space, deep down, we're all seeking the same fundamental human needs.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What does she mean by open field?
Well, she describes it as a place where, all of creation could potentially reunite. It's a space where we're all looking for dignity, joy, love, acceptance.
To be seen, to feel safe.
Exactly. And what's key is that these aren't like physical goods we're fighting over. They're more like spiritual necessities.
Hmm. So it paints this picture of a shared journey. We're all kind of heading towards the same core things.
Precisely. And often our own personal journey into figuring out what makes life meaningful, it kicks off with a big moment, doesn't it? A sort of pivotal question.
Yeah, something that shakes things up.
Think about Siddhartha. His encounters with aging, sickness, death, things he'd been totally sheltered from,
Right, it completely shattered his reality.
and set him on this whole new path. Or Simon Peter, just a fisherman, and then Jesus calls him and his entire life gets redirected.
Becomes a leader in a whole new movement.
Or Ida B. Wells, the terrible injustice, the loss of her friends that ignited her fight for justice.
And it's interesting how the sources describe that initial feeling. It's like your life is wrecked, isn't it? Your old way of seeing things just falls apart.
It really does.
Yeah.
But then, from that breaking point, something new can emerge, a transformative perspective.
They all had to give something up, didn't they? Siddhartha, his luxury, Peter, his old job, Wells, her sense of peace, maybe.
Yeah, significant sacrifices. But in return, they found this powerful new direction, a purpose that went way beyond just their own individual lives.
And that points to something else, too. Grappling with this huge question, it's usually not something you do alone.
Right. The sources really emphasize exploring these things with others, like the Life Worth Living seminar that's mentioned. We need that connection, those other perspectives.
Because, let's be honest, what makes a life worth living? It's a massive question. Feels overwhelming sometimes.
Totally. So where do we even begin?
Well, the idea seems to be break it down, like any big project, right?
Yeah.
You tackle it in smaller pieces.
Exactly. And the sources suggest three main categories or types of questions to help with that.
Okay, what are they?
First, there are effectiveness questions.
Right.
Basically, how can I achieve my goals? Practical stuff.
Right. How do I get what I think I want?
Then, self-awareness questions. What do I really want?
Yeah.
Getting clearer on your actual desires.
Okay, that seems deeper.
And finally, self-transcendence questions. This is the big one. What is truly worth wanting? Is what I want genuinely valuable?
Ah, okay. Effectiveness, self-awareness, self-transcendence, that gives us a kind of framework.
It does. And to sort of illustrate the complexity, there's this analogy of the card game War.
Oh, yeah. How does that work?
Well, you know War, right? You're dealt cards randomly. Seems like pure chance determines who wins each round.
Right, high card wins. Simple.
But even there, you still have choices. Do you play? Do you follow the rules? How do you react when you lose a card?
So even when things seem determined, there's still an element of how you engage with it.
Exactly. It highlights that even though life deals us circumstances, we don't choose our hand, we still have responsibility for how we play that hand. Our attitude or actions, they still matter.
That's a good point. Okay, so before we dive into all these external perspectives, the sources suggest something important first.
Yeah, taking stock. Looking at your own life right now.
Yeah.
A kind of personal inventory.
And it's pretty detailed, isn't it? Not just big picture stuff.
No, it gets specific. Like, how is your body actually feeling? What emotions are dominant for you day to day? What thoughts keep looping in your head?
And critically, how do you actually spend your resources? Your time? Look at your calendar. Your money, where does it go? Your attention, what's on your newsfeed?
Right. Looking at the real patterns. Daily, weekly, monthly routines. And also, how much unscheduled time do you have? Time for rest, for people, for, spiritual practice, if that's part of your life.
Then it goes even deeper. What are your biggest hopes? Your deepest fears?
What brings you real joy, real peace? What memories make you cringe, or which ones make you light up? What makes you feel embarrassed?
And then this killer question. Above all, they were ophorized. Like if someone had to summarize your life based on this inventory, what word would they use?
Oof. Yeah, it's confronting.
It is.
Huh.
And then how do you feel about that word? And maybe more importantly, what word would you want them to use?
That gap, right, between the eyes and the ought to be, that can be a real driver for change.
Definitely. And this whole process leads us back to that self-awareness question. What do I want?
But it's tricky, isn't it? Because you ask, what do I want? And the answer often leads to another why, like peeling an onion.
Yeah, you want the promotion. Why? For respect. Why do you want respect? For security. Why? It keeps going.
Exactly. And as you peel those layers, you start to realize that maybe what you're ultimately after isn't just a list of things or feelings.
Something bigger.
Yeah, like a vision of a good life. Not necessarily a super detailed plan, but the broad strokes. What does a life lived well look like, feel like for you?
Maybe thinking about what you truly wish for the people you love most can give some clues there.
That's a great way to think about it, actually. It often reveals our deepest values.
Okay, so we've got effectiveness achieving goals and self-awareness knowing what we truly want. But you mentioned a third level.
Self-transcendence. And this is where, according to the sources, the inquiry gets really profound. It moves beyond just my desires. To ask, is what I want actually worth wanting? Is it genuinely good? Is it true?
Okay. So shifting from personal preference to questions of real value.
Exactly. And this is where things get weightier.
Yeah.
Because if it's only about what I want, things can feel a bit, well, arbitrary, can't they?
Yeah, just based on my whims.
So the sources bring in this idea of responsibility. But not just responsibility for my actions, but responsibility to something beyond myself. They call it smoky responsibility.
Smoky responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me more. That sounds intriguing.
It's this sense that we're accountable somehow.
Yeah.
The Quran has this story where God asks humanity, am I not your Lord? And they say, yes, we testify. It points to this inherent feeling of being answerable.
Like that little voice, maybe, that sometimes tells you, yeah, you could do that, but maybe you shouldn't.
Exactly that kind of feeling. It creates this potential gap, this tension between what we desire and what's actually worth living for. It gives weight to these questions of value.
Okay, so if there's this deeper sense of value, how does that connect to how a good life feels? Is it just about feeling happy all the time?
Well, that's one view. Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian philosopher, basically argued yes. A good life feels good. Maximize pleasure, minimize pain. Simple as that.
That's his pushpin principle, right, where playing a simple game could be just as valuable as reading poetry if it gives the same amount of pleasure.
Precisely. For Bentham, the type of pleasure didn't matter, only the quantity. So, yeah, theoretically, a really popular but maybe trashy TV show could be better than a profound piece of art if more people enjoyed it.
Challenging. What are the counter-arguments?
Well, take the Buddhist nun Suva. Her story suggests something different. She encounters someone infatuated with her physical beauty.
And her response is quite radical.
Extremely. She literally removes her own eye to show him the impermanence and ultimately unattractive nature of the body from her perspective. Her goal wasn't immediate pleasure, but enlightenment.
So for her, the good feeling wasn't pleasure, but contentment, detachment.
Exactly, a kind of calm liberation from craving, which is seen as the root of suffering. It's considered a higher, more appropriate way to feel, given the nature of reality. The trouble with pleasure, from this view, is we get attached, we crave more, and it distracts us.
Okay, so pleasure versus enlightened contentment. Any other takes on feeling?
Oh, yes. Oscar Wilde throws a curveball. He argues that sorrow is the supreme emotion.
Sorrow. Really, not joy.
Nope, sorrow. For Wilde, life is inherently tragic, full of suffering. And the most profound human response isn't to run from it, but to be deeply attuned to it, even to choose it sometimes, like mourning with a friend.
So trying to eliminate all sorrow would actually make us less human, less capable of deep experience.
That's the idea. He felt sorrow opened up depths that constant pleasure couldn't reach. It connects us to the reality of the world.
Wow, okay. Bentham, Suha. Wild, very different emotional landscapes for a good life. What about the circumstances of a good life? What external things make it go well?
Well, there's the common modern vision, right? What some call the triple vision.
Let me guess. Affluence, achievement, attractiveness.
You got it. Money, success, looking good, often pushed as the keys to happiness. But our sources definitely question that.
Yeah, money and power are obviously appealing. They seem like tools to get other things we want.
Sure, but look at something like the college admission scandal mentioned in the sources. People with affluence and a drive for achievement engaged in fraud, bribery.
Mm,
It raises serious ethical questions about whether pursuing those A's at all costs is truly good.
right. The means tainted the ends, maybe even revealed the ends weren't that worthwhile to begin with.
Contrast that with Aristotle's idea of eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing.
Which is more than just happiness, right?
Much more. It's about living well, acting virtuously, fulfilling your potential as a human. It's an active state of being, not just a feeling.
And then you have someone like Siddhartha, who saw even conventionally good circumstances, like the birth of his son, as an impediment to his quest.
A radical detachment, yeah.
Mhm.
What most would see as a blessing, he saw as another tie to the cycle of suffering he wanted to escape.
There's also that cruise ship analogy. It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. The passengers are enjoying this effortless luxury, these ideal circumstances.
But it all depends on the hard, often unseen labor of the crew below deck.
Exactly. It forces us to ask about the distribution of good circumstances. Does my flourishing depend on someone else not flourishing? How fair is that?
And the Apostle Paul adds another layer. His concern wasn't just his own salvation or good circumstances.
No, he was deeply invested in his community and even envisioned the transformation of the entire world. It challenges a purely individualistic focus on my good life.
Which leads to this really big question. How universal do good circumstances need to be truly good? Can my life be fully good if others are suffering immensely? What's our horizon of hope?
Deep questions. And they lead naturally into, okay, given all this, how should we live? What's the right way to act?
And the sources suggest it's not just about relying on systems like markets or laws to magically produce good outcomes from, say, selfish behavior.
Right, that idea of moral alchemy. It's flawed. Relying too much on systems can actually make us morally lazy, or worse, unable to see right from wrong when the systems fail or produce bad results. Our own moral muscles atrophy.
We need our own compass.
We do. Look at Arjuna, the Bhagavad Gita. He's facing this incredibly complex situation, a righteous war, but he has to fight his own relatives, his teachers.
Duty versus personal ties, no easy answer.
None at all. Then you have the idea of living by divine command, like Abraham being told by God to sacrifice Isaac. It seems clear, just follow the rules.
But raises huge questions, right? How do you know it's really God? What if the command seems morally wrong? The risk of misinterpretation or even manipulation?
Huge risks. Mencius offers a different path, cultivating virtue from within. He talks about those 4 sprouts we mentioned earlier.
Compassion, shame, modesty, sense of right-wrong.
Yeah. He believed these are innate, like seeds, and we need to actively nurture them so they grow into full virtues like humaneness, righteousness, propriety, wisdom. It's about character development.
Then there are more universalist approaches, like Peter Singer's idea.
Right, impartial goodness. Maximize well-being for all sentient beings, equally. No special preference for yourself, your family, your country.
That sounds incredibly demanding.
It is a very high bar. Contrast that with Charles Taylor and the ethic of authenticity.
Which is more about being true to yourself.
Exactly. Each person is unique, has unique gifts, and the moral task is to discover and live in line with that unique self, contributing your specific part to the world.
But Mencius apparently had critiques of both extremes, like pure self-focus and trying to care about everyone equally.
Yeah, he worried that focusing only on yourself makes you less human, less connected. But he also thought trying to have impartial benevolence towards everyone could dilute the special bonds and duties we have within our families and communities. Being a good father isn't the same as being impartially good to all children, for instance.
It's complicated. What about the Good Samaritan parable? That seems relevant here.
Very. It completely reframes the question, who is my neighbor? It's not about shared religion or ethnicity or social group.
It's about who shows mercy to someone in need, right? Whoever they are.
Exactly. It blows open the boundaries of our moral responsibility. Our neighbor is anyone we encounter who needs help. It points towards a much wider scope of care.
Okay, so we've looked at feelings, circumstances, actions. What about the really big picture, our place in the cosmos? How do different traditions frame that?
Huge variations here. You have Julian of Norwich, the medieval mystic. She had these visions of a world created out of God's love, fragile like a hazelnut, but ultimately held safe in that love. Despite all the suffering, her message was one of profound hope. All shall be well.
That's a comforting vision. What about other perspectives?
Robin Wall Kimmerer offers an indigenous perspective, emphasizing reciprocity. Humans aren't masters of nature, but younger siblings who need to learn from other species, practice gratitude, and live cooperatively. The Sky Woman creation story illustrates this, a world built through mutual effort and generosity.
Very different feel from Dominion, more like partnership.
Definitely. Then there's Carl Sagan looking out at the cosmos, the pale blue dot image.
Right. Earth seen from deep space makes you feel tiny.
Exactly. It underscores our smallness, our fragility, but also our shared destiny on this one planet. His takeaway was a call for kindness, for cherishing each other and our world, because in the vastness of space, it's all we have.
A secular call for responsibility.
Yes. And E.O. Wilson brings an evolutionary lens. Human nature, our mix of selfishness and altruism, is a product of natural selection. We're shaped by our evolutionary past.
Which raises that classic question, if it's all just evolution, just where does the moral ought come from? How do we get from biology to ethics?
A perennial challenge for purely naturalistic worldviews. Then you have someone like Ray Kurzweil looking to the future.
The technological singularity idea.
Yeah, the idea that human intelligence will eventually merge with artificial intelligence, leading to exponential change, maybe even reshaping the universe. A very different kind of big picture.
And finally, the Buddhist view.
The cycle of samsara. Life as inherently marked by dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness, impermanence. The goal isn't cosmic transformation in Kurzweil's sense, but liberation from that cycle altogether, breaking free.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot of frameworks. Now, inevitably, in trying to live a good life, we mess up. We fail. How do the sources suggest we respond to personal failure? Is it just dust yourself off and try again?
Sometimes, but often it's deeper. Oscar Wilde, again, had strong views here. He thought owning up to failure, feeling that pang of conscience, was absolutely essential. Not something shameful, but necessary for growth. Don't brush it off.
Okay. Face it head on. What about more practical advice?
Well, there's the sort of Daniel Tiger approach, borrowing from the kids' show. Simple, immediate coping strategies for when you feel overwhelmed or angry. Take a deep breath and count to 4. Basic, but sometimes useful in the moment.
Good for immediate reactions. What about bigger moral failures?
Peter Singer, from his utilitarian standpoint, suggests starting small. If you feel you're not doing enough good, don't get paralyzed. Begin with something achievable, like donating a small percentage of your income. Build from there.
Make it manageable.
Right. Pema Chodron, the Buddhist teacher, offers a different approach. Compassionate awareness. Turn towards your past failures, not to beat yourself up or even necessarily to fix them immediately, but to understand the underlying patterns, the habits of mind that cause suffering for yourself and others.
So understanding with kindness rather than judgment?
Exactly. Compassion is key. That's seen as the path to real change. And the rabbinic tradition in Judaism places huge emphasis on teshuvah, repentance, or turning. It's seen as this incredibly powerful, transformative act, something the world itself depends on.
So failure isn't the end, it can be a turning point.
A crucial one, which leads us to the broader issue of suffering. Life hurts sometimes. How do we navigate that?
There's that simple analogy of the fireplace.
Yeah, it illustrates our basic instinct, right? We naturally move towards warmth, comfort, pleasure, and away from cold, pain, suffering. It's instinctive.
But sometimes suffering isn't just personal bad luck, is it?
No, and Mary Wollstonecraft really highlighted this. She argued that a huge amount of suffering comes from unjust social structures, inequality, lack of education, lack of opportunity, particularly for women in her time.
So her focus was less on individual coping and more on changing society.
Yes. Addressing the systemic roots of suffering was crucial for her. Confucius also saw a link between societal order and suffering. When rulers deviate from the way, when names and realities don't match up, suffering follows. For him, wise leadership and restoring social harmony were key.
What about accepting suffering that maybe can't be changed by social reform?
James Baldwin speaks powerfully to this. He acknowledged life's inherent tragedy, the unavoidable pain. His view was complex. Resist injustice with everything you have and learn to accept the suffering you can't change. Crucially, he stressed working on your own pain so you don't inflict it on others.
It's a profound responsibility.
It is. Al-Ghazali, the Islamic theologian, offered a perspective of trust in divine providence. Ultimately, all suffering comes from God, who is wise and benevolent, and it serves some purpose for our spiritual growth, even if we don't understand it.
Finding meaning through faith.
Yes. And then Nietzsche comes at it from a completely different angle. For him, suffering wasn't necessarily evil at all.
He saw it as necessary for growth, didn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A catalyst for becoming stronger, deeper, more resilient. He worried that trying too hard to eliminate suffering would also eliminate the potential for great joy and achievement. You need the lows to appreciate the highs, in a sense.
That's a challenging thought. What about the Book of Job? That's all about suffering.
It is. And what's fascinating about Job is that he doesn't get a neat explanation for his suffering. He protests, he argues with God, he maintains his innocence, and in the end, God responds. But not by explaining why.
More by showing Job the vastness and mystery of creation.
Exactly. Job finds a kind of peace and acceptance without getting all the answers. It affirms the validity of protest, but also the limits of human understanding in the face of suffering.
And Nhat Hanh, his Buddhist perspective.
He brings it back to the idea of emptiness and transformation. Suffering, he argues, arises from clinging to a false, fixed sense of self. When we realize everything is interconnected, impermanent, constantly changing, including ourselves, then the craving, the attachment that causes suffering can cease.
Letting go of the illusion of a permanent me.
That's the core of it. Which brings us, inevitably, to the ultimate end. What happens after we die? Lots of different views here, too.
Plato had ideas about the soul, didn't he?
Yes, he saw the soul as distinct from the body, almost imprisoned by it. Death was a release, allowing the soul to pursue pure intellectual realities in an afterlife.
Nhat Hanh, coming from that perspective of transformation, likely sees it differently.
Completely. His view is no death, no fear. Death isn't an end, but just another transformation. Like a cloud becoming rain, then vapor, then cloud again. There's no permanent self to actually die, so the concept is misleading.
What about the argument that we need death for life to have meaning?
That's Martin Hagelin's argument. He suggests that finitude, the fact that life ends and we can lose things, is precisely what makes our choices, our commitments, our loves meaningful. If everything lasted forever, nothing would truly be at stake.
An intriguing secular perspective. How does the Christian view contrast with these?
Well, the Apostle Paul, for instance, sees death as an enemy. It's not a natural part of a good cycle, nor just the soul escaping. But he argues Jesus' resurrection broke death's ultimate power.
So the hope isn't just the soul living on, but something more.
Yes, the hope is for resurrection of the body, a transformed, healed, imperishable existence. It affirms the goodness of this embodied life, but offers a future state that's radically better, beyond death's reach, putting on imperishability.
Okay. We've covered a huge amount of ground feelings, circumstances, actions, the big picture, failure, suffering, death. What's the key takeaway?
One thing that comes through again and again is that just understanding all this intellectually isn't enough. Insight has to lead to action.
Right. Knowing isn't the same as doing.
Exactly. The sources use the example of Thomas Jefferson. He knew slavery was wrong, wrote eloquently about liberty, but didn't free most of the people he enslaved.
Contrast that with someone like Robert Carter III, who also inherited enslaved people, but took concrete steps to free them, despite the social and economic costs.
A stark difference. It highlights the critical step of translating belief into practice. Kimmerer's call for reciprocity isn't just a nice idea, it demands action. Baldwin warns about the danger of knowing what's right, but refusing to do it.
But change is hard, isn't it? We know what we should do, but...
Oh, absolutely. Our own selves can be unruly. That's where ideas like Thaler and Sunstein's nudge theory come in.
Right, the idea that we're not always rational, so we can design our environment to gently push us towards better choices.
Yeah, making the good choice the easier choice, without restricting freedom entirely. Setting up defaults, reminders, things like that.
What about more internal strategies?
Al-Ghazali stressed constant vigilance and even a kind of self-suspicion. Being aware of your motivations, questioning your own soul or ego, because it tends to stray. Knowing God is watching was a key motivator for him.
Wilde, on the other hand, emphasized authenticity. Be thyself, living in line with your true nature.
A different emphasis, yes. And then there's the powerful story of the rich young man who comes to Jesus.
He asks what he needs to do for eternal life, and Jesus tells him to sell everything and follow him.
And the young man goes away sad, because he has many possessions. It shows how, even when the path is clear, our attachments in this case, wealth can hold us back. Wealth can act like a rival god, distorting our values.
It suggests flourishing isn't something we achieve on our own steam, but maybe a gift we receive by letting go.
That seems to be the implication. Admitting our limitations, our inability to save ourselves, and choosing to follow a different path.
So if we do manage to make a change, how do we stay on track? It's easy to slip back into old habits.
Definitely. Sustaining change requires ongoing effort and often specific practices. Look at Bill W.'s story and the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous.
The 12 steps.
Right. They provide a clear structure, acknowledging powerlessness, relying on a higher power, however understood, self-examination, making amends, ongoing mutual support. It addresses deep-seated habits.
What about other traditions?
The Dalai Lama talks about the Buddhist pharmacy, using meditation and insight into the true nature of things, like emptiness, non-self, as antidotes to negative emotions and illusions. It's seen as a foundational cure.
And the Jesuits?
Ignatius of Loyola developed the spiritual exercises. These are intense practices, often done on retreat, designed to cultivate a deep love for God and commitment to service. Things like the Examen, a daily reflection practice, help maintain that focus day to day.
Community seems crucial too, doesn't it? Like in AA.
Hugely important across many traditions. Being part of a community that shares your values and practices provides support, accountability, and reinforcement. It's hard to sustain a transformative way of life entirely on your own.
And Kimmerer has that lovely image of the nut trees.
Oh, the mass fruiting. Yeah, how trees like oaks or hickories coordinate their nut production in unpredictable cycles.
It's not just about individual trees, but the whole forest acting together.
Exactly. It illustrates resilience, interdependence, the wisdom of cycles and timing. A beautiful metaphor for sustaining life and flourishing together.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, where does it leave us?
Well, maybe we can circle back to Maria Shriver's open field.
That space beyond judgment.
Right. And seeing how all these diverse perspectives, even when they seem to conflict, are in some way pointing towards those same fundamental human longings we talked about at the start.
Dignity, joy, love, acceptance, being seen, safety.
Exactly. They're all wrestling with how to achieve those in the context of a human life.
And maybe a key message is to challenge that voice inside. We all have it sometimes, that whispers our life doesn't really matter, that it's trivial.
Absolutely. Reject that voice. The sources, in the different ways, affirm that your life does have value. It is worth living, and wrestling with these questions is part of that value.
So this hasn't been about finding the one single right answer.
Not at all. More about cultivating habits of reflection, maybe picking up some tools, some different lenses to keep exploring this question for yourself. The really important thing is just to get started and then to keep going.
Okay, so a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on after this.
Consider how your own personal vision of a flourishing life connects or maybe disconnects with the well-being of the people around you, your community, maybe even the wider world.
How does your flourishing impact others? And maybe what's one small, concrete action you could take, maybe even today, that aligns with some insight or value that resonated with you during our conversation?